All right, hello everyone. If you're here for the Pervious Pavement webinar, you are in the right place. This webinar is sponsored by the City of Palo Alto, as well as the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. Our speaker today will be Ryan Marlinghaus, and I'm just gonna go through a couple housekeeping slides, a little bit about Bosca, and then we'll jump right in. So this webinar is on Zoom, so a little bit about how it works. All of the attendees are muted by default. There's a couple points throughout the presentation that Ryan will stop for question and answer, and, as well as at the end of his presentation. So at that time, you can, the moderator will call on you to ask the question, or you can just leave it in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on both the City of Palo Alto website as well as Bosca's website. So be on the lookout for that recording in about a week or so. So a little bit about Bosca. Bosca represents 26 different agencies throughout the Bay Area that purchase their water from the San Francisco Regional Water System. They provide water to about 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses throughout the Bay Area. Their Bosca's goal is high quality supply of water at a fair price. So their program objectives are outdoor water use is the single largest opportunity for water conservation. So we hope to get water use reductions through water efficient plants and innovative techniques that can help conserve water. Bosca offers a variety of programs as well as this landscape series. A couple programs that Bosca offers, and this is particularly if you live in San Mateo County. If you are a Palo Alto resident or live in Santa Clara County, we will be talking about your rebates available to you towards the end of this presentation. But if you are in any Bosca territory, you are eligible for these rebates. They offer landscape conversion rebates, as well as rain barrel rebates. They also have some rebates for irrigation controllers and rain gardens. And here's a list of a couple of the upcoming landscape webinars. We're towards the end of the spring season, but we will be releasing more landscape webinars planned for the fall. Please check back to Bosca's website, probably during the summer, to see what landscape webinars will be offered in the fall. Bosca also offers other resources available to everyone, such as the Bay Area Gardening website. And lastly, before we get started, we are going to launch a quick poll to see who we have in our audience. So please fill out how familiar you are with Pervious Pavement. Please let us know where you're from and just a little bit about yourself. We'll give you about a minute to give us your feedback, and then we'll launch the results and get right into Ryan's presentation. All right, and the results are in. So about half of you are not familiar at all, or sorry, about a third of you, and then some are pretty familiar. Most of you are from Palo Alto and are homeowners. So thank you for giving us your feedback. And I'll go ahead and pass it off to Ryan now so he can start his presentation.
Okay. My name is Ryan Marlinghaus. Thank you everyone for coming today and taking time out of your busy schedules to talk about something that's very important to me. And also thank you to Bosca and the city of Palo Alto and all their efforts to host this venue and make this possible. Today, the agenda is to talk a little bit about the problem to begin with and how pervious pavements can help address it. And then more will address and talk about the types of pervious pavements, talks about the ins and outs, details, even go through cost. And I'm happy we'll have, again, as it was pointed out, we'll have several breaks for questions. I'm happy to ask very specific questions about your project. If you have a project in mind, as much as time permits, I'm happy to go through all that. So please let us know what your questions are. And then we'll talk a little bit about my products as well. And then the city of Palo Alto will have time to talk about the Pervious Pavement rebate program in the end. A little bit about my background. I started a landscape business quite a while ago and was always focused on being environmental as well as entrepreneurial. About 20 years ago, I received recognition from my peers for the efforts in being environmental. Specifically, we focus more on the softscape, and that is the plants. We focused on drought tolerant native plants. So we reduced the amount of water that was used in the landscape. We were very cutting edge as far as drip irrigation, even using it in regular lawns. We recycled, reused materials. We didn't use any herbicides or pesticides. It was all organic. Did sheet mulching. Our fleet of trucks also ran on natural gas. So there's some of the things that we did to be more environmental. However, what I noticed when I really started looking at the embodied energy as far as the carbon footprint of our process, it stood out that the hardscapes, or at least the pavements, was lacking. And so that was like the single biggest carbon producer. And so I went about learning more about concrete in particular, which led in time to being introduced to Pervious Concrete in 2003. In 2005, we installed our first Pervious Concrete. And since that time, I've dedicated at least half my time to learning about Pervious Concrete and studying it, installing it, promoting it as well. So, and then 7 years ago, I sold Earth Care Landscaping to focus fully on my company, Pervious Products, today. So of course, I'm a little biased on the Pervious Concrete side, but I have installed all of these permeable pavements except for one, and have experience with all the permeable pavements. I am getting a little rustier these days, but I think I still know quite a bit about what we're doing. So water runoff in particular from rain, though it can be from irrigation and other sources as well. The main problem is that it runs off and it goes into our creeks, into our bay. Also, flooding potential can be increased in two ways. One of those is just that you're having a lot more water running off in a shorter period of time and overwhelming our systems. It can also lead, other thing that can happen is by not having as much groundwater reclaimed, the groundwater not being recharged, you can actually get subsidence. In the Bay Area, this has been stopped over the last several decades. I don't believe there's any more subsidence, but in much of California and other parts of the world, that is still an issue. And that what happens there is that too much water is taken out of the ground, which causes the ground to actually settle and sink, and it's irreversibly lower. So when it rains, what happens is all the water that falls on our the roof, the lawns, takes all that runoff, the fertilizers, herbicides, motor oil, and so forth, takes it all, and sources from like this, they all go straight into our storm drain system. And the storm drain is unfiltered. It just basically just a catch basin that goes and dumps directly into the creeks in the bay with no filtration. One exception is the city of San Francisco, where they actually have a combined sewer and storm drain system. So the sewer system is a separate system typically that takes all of the house and office wastewater, and that's treated before it's released back into the bay, or it's sometimes reused water too. However, in the city of San Francisco, they have a combined sewer and storm drain system, which poses its own kind of problems. If you get too much rain, it gets overwhelmed, they can actually dump raw sewage out into the creeks and the ocean. So we have an urban situation with Palo Alto even, where over half of the land area is covered with impervious surface now. So the buildings, pavements account for covering up more than half the land, which leads to over 5 times the amount of runoff from a pre-development condition, as well as 5 times less groundwater infiltration to recharge our groundwater. So how pervious pavements can help mitigate that is, number one, is they mimic pre-development conditions, and that they allow the water that falls on the land to have an opportunity to be absorbed by the land. This can also reduce the heat island effect. Heat island is when we have all this pavement, in particular the darker pavement, it absorbs the heat from the sun and actually raises the temperature of the urban area by up to several degrees. Because the water and air can get to the roots, now it can benefit trees and shrubs, allows the soil to kind of transpire and breathe. There's also a natural filtration process which occurs. And this also happens when we're with the groundwater. Groundwater can be some of the cleanest water because you have all that, the soil, the gravel to filter the water as it goes through the ground. The similar can happen also with pervious pavements, in that beneficial bacteria build up within the rock and the pores of the pavement and can actually break down pollutants as it goes. And there's been many studies that have documented all the different pollutants this can mitigate. There can also be some noise reduction with pervious pavement. In particular for the highways, they cut these grooves in the concrete highways, like on Highway 85. They cut grooves in the highway, and that's done at least in part to reduce the noise from the cars. And so pervious pavements can, by a couple decibels, reduce noise as well. Questions at this point?
Ryan, no questions from the Q&A, but just a reminder for our attendee. Oh, I do see a raised hand, so we can attempt to go ahead and do that from Anna. I'm going to allow you to talk, and you'll have to unmute on your end to ask your question.
What about roofs? Is there good roof to consider?
Roofs, as far as to minimize pollution from water running off the roof?
Yes.
That's a good question. Typical composite roofs are made with tar and small gravel. The gravel will probably be fine, but the tar could possibly, I hadn't really considered it much, but that definitely could run off and add to the problem. So I would guess in general, metal roof or the clay tile type roof might be better.
Okay.
And I guess, and as well too, that's why they usually, as far as they'll make a lighter roof too, a lighter color can be better as far as the heat island, minimizing the heat island effect. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Thanks, Anna. We have one more question. I think you might be answering this in your next section from Esther. And her question is, what is pervious pavement made of?
Okay, that's a great segue into our next section. There's no other questions, Susie?
No other questions.
Okay. So there are many types of permeable pavements, and the ones that are asterisked here are recognized by the city of Palo Alto for the rebate program. Porous asphalt is the one I don't really know much about. Pervious concrete, obviously I do, and the others as well. And we'll talk a little bit about them as well as we go later in the program. You can do these other ones if you're just looking to be permeable, obviously, and there's pluses and minuses to each of them, as we'll see. Porous asphalt basically consists of a binder and rock without some of the fines in it, similar to pervious concrete, and has a high degree of permeability. A typical cross section can look like this, where you have the several inches of asphalt over a bigger layer of crushed rock. And what's significant about this crushed rock, it's an open crushed rock, and it has voids of around 40%. And it's basically a recharge bed or a reservoir for the water. Once the water goes through the pavement, it now has a chance to be stored in this rock before it is absorbed into the soil below. So in the case, say it's 6 inches, you'd have up to 2.5 inches if it was completely level of, we have a big rain storm over the course of a day. And a lot of the soil in Palo Alto in particular can be very clay and take a while to absorb water. But in this case, if you have a reservoir, you can store it. It can slowly make its way into the soil over a day or two. Here's some examples of porous asphalt. Here it is up close. And this slide, the one point I want to make is that pervious pavements in general, in my opinion, aren't to be used as a catch basin. If I see what I see on the edge here is a little bit of puddling, and that could be because there's a lot of runoff coming onto the pavement. So a properly designed permeable pavement will not have runoff coming onto it. Or if you're going to do that, then you need to allow for an extra maintenance cycle. You need to allow for extra maintenance of that, because wherever you have impermeable surface running on to the pavement is going to bring all these pollutants and dust and so forth, and could overwhelm the system. And in the case of asphalt, it will bring tar flecks that could run off and also clog up the system. So careful consideration of that, making sure there's no erosion running onto your permeable pavement. And just in general, the more pervious area there is, less chance it's going to clog. Pervious concrete is basically concrete minus the sand. So it too consists of rock, the binder, which is cement, and water. It has also a high degree of voids, and so the water really pours through it. It too is placed over a bed of gravel. Now, typically when we've installed pervious concrete, it's about 6 inches and 6 inches. So 6 inches of pervious concrete over 6 inches of crushed rock. And that's for a driveway. For pedestrian, for walking areas, it could be 3.5 and 3.5 or 4 and 4. And again, the reason to have the rock below it, both the crushed rock layer below will both act as a reservoir. It also acts to kind of cushion and minimize the minimum of the soil below. And there's ways, if you have a sloped sloped area, which everybody is to one extent or another, you can deal with that in different ways. You could cut a little deeper in one area and shallower in the other to make it more level in your subgrade. You can also put berms in to kind of dam the water, or vice versa. You could have a trench drain going across to catch the water as well. So there are ways to address slopes as well. A sort of typical pervious concrete installation, non-COVID friendly, with all these guys all in one place working together. It's a little excessive as far as how much manpower is in one area, but it gets the point as far as pervious concrete is placed. It's placed fast. It's done section by section. As soon as one little section is done, it's not touched anymore. It's covered with plastic and helps secure. It's very sensitive to drying out while it's placed. And so you do need to do it quickly and efficiently in consideration of the weather. Pervious concrete is strong enough. It can support over 7 times the weight of a fire truck, and this is according to the California Fire Code. So in the case of when you have a driveway in particular in the hills and you need to have a backup, turnaround area for the fire trucks, it will more than satisfy that requirement. So pervious concrete can be a little bit weaker than regular concrete, but the reason concrete fails is because it cracks, not because it falls apart. And this is the thing, concrete cracks over time and starts to move and shift and just looks unsightly. So people want to take it out because of that, but it's not failing generally because it falls apart. And that's the same thing with pervious concrete. There are many reasons concrete cracks, but one of the big reasons is because it does shrink. And pervious concrete, because it doesn't have much water, it doesn't have much cement, it tends to shrink less than regular concrete. And therefore it cracks less. And definitely that's been the case for us. We have very little cracking in our pervious concrete. Again, another example. It can be used in any application, just like porous asphalt, as far as on low use roads, parking lots, and certainly any residential applications. So kind of a comparison here between the two. Porous asphalt will be less expensive to install. And I really don't know exactly the price. I'm just estimating here as far as down on the cost of 10 to 15 a square foot on the asphalt. I would, and that, by the way, is also including all the demo. So in most applications, we're talking about redoing an existing site, maybe taking out existing asphalt or concrete driveway, or at least digging out soil. So in that case, I've allowed for that. So it should be accurate to a typical homeowner situation with an existing home. The pervious concrete is definitely going to be lighter, so that'll help with the solar reflectivity and minimizing urban heat island effect. Again, the applications will be similar for both of them. The maintenance is, I think, can be, again, minimal. If it's done correctly, where it's not being treated as the catch basin, then maintenance can be quite low. It's when those times when you do have other areas running onto it, where you'll definitely need to pay more attention to maintaining and to maintain that permeability. And I guess also it's coarser, so bigger voids, so you can get debris like leaves and stuck in there, and then maybe over time that builds up. For our PerkTop, which is finer, and we'll talk about that later, we've done actually no maintenance extra. And as far as I know, it's still very pervious. Now, if it should get clogged up from sand or dirt being dropped on it, it can easily be, at least a lot of the permeability can be restored by pressure washing. And they have other specialized equipment that actually pressure washes and vacuums at the same time as well. It can be used on larger areas. But typically just regular maintenance, especially for homeowners, I think, maybe a little more than what you do as far as blowing and sweeping is generally what's required, unless you have a situation where you have a lot of runoff. Questions at this point?
We do have a bit of questions, Ryan.
Okay.
We're going to start off with this one. So do you need to have a reservoir to use porous asphalt? How would this material do in shifting clay soil?
I think you definitely need the reservoir, or you need the rock below the porous asphalt. Porous asphalt, or asphalt in general, is only poured 2 to 3 or 4 inches thick at the most, and it relies upon that gravel layer below it for structural support and to mitigate the changes in the soil below. So you do need some kind of rock below, definitely in that situation. Porous concrete being more structural, it could do, in situations you can do it without rock below it. And I know they did a long pervious concrete path in Cupertino by McClellan Ranch, and it was a sensitive area along a creek. And so specifically, they did not put rock below it and pour it more or less on the soil, but also the soil drained well. And there's areas in San Francisco where you have really sandy soil. You can do, in that situation, you could do it right over the soil there. In that situation too, you may be able to do porous asphalt over sandy soil as well. I don't know as much, but in general, you will definitely want a rock base.
Great. And we actually had a couple of questions about tree roots. So can you put a pervious concrete under oaks? We had some heaving of sand under the stones in a patio that we had with an oak tree. How about using it for a driveway? And then a similar question about how do you deal with tree roots coming up? So
in general, permeable pavements can be good for trees in that because they're allowing the air and water through, it's less reason for the roots to come to the surface. Therefore, it can minimize how much they do come to the surface and damage the pavement. Now, vice versa, yes, we have put in pervious concrete specifically because in a sensitive area where there were a high amount of oak trees and obviously roots. So we have done that for those areas specifically because there was concern about maintaining the health of the oak trees. Of course, one has to be careful not to damage, like when you're putting in the pavement, you don't want to have to remove a bunch of roots or damage the roots that are there. So there's a balance with that. But there are studies that show doing permeable pavement, planting a tree to begin with and doing permeable pavement around it will minimize the roots coming up. But which trees that applies to and which it doesn't, there hasn't been extensive studies to document that.
Okay, and we do have a raised hand from Solang that we're going to take, and then we have a few more questions in the Q&A. So Solang, I'm going to allow you to talk, and if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I was the one asking about the tree roots. I have 2 trees, and they're uprooted in my driveway, and one is a I forget the name, an apple pear. But, if you put the permeable asphalt down, then how do you keep the roots from coming up? So I think you just answered it, or you I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you, Suling. So in an established tree, the permeable pavement, as far as will it keep roots from coming up, I don't know. It may be harder once it's established. Certainly once they're younger from the beginning, you have a better chance to prevent roots from coming up using a permeable pavement. Once they're established, it may be more difficult. What we've done in those situations is we will selectively prune the roots. I mean, we'll make a call whether to leave the root or prune it. Say we're taking out the existing material before we put in the rock and the concrete. We will, selectively decide, okay, this root has to go, in which case we'll go ahead and carefully prune it back so it has a chance to recover. And in those cases where we're worried that the roots will do damage later, we can also put in a root barrier, a heavy plastic they make with these ridges on it. They make specifically to minimize root intrusion in the future. And that'll also buy us more time. We've had good luck with those, but how long they really last, especially it just really depends, how established the tree is and other things. So yeah.
All right, thanks, Ryan. This question comes from Catherine. Does it help to reduce cracking if you build smaller sections of pervious concrete rather than a bigger slab?
Yeah, definitely in general, yes. And one thing that jumps out, what I've noticed is probably in the 60s, they used to install concrete a lot with 2x4s. And so now they're all rotting out and we're replacing those 2x4s or taking out all the concrete. But I'll tell you, a lot of that pavement that was put in using these 2x4s has held up really well. And, a lot of that's just because they isolated one little slab to the other, and therefore it really minimized the cracking and and the potential for cracking to transfer from one section to the other. When we install pervious concrete, concrete's always going to crack, and so that's why you have the lines in the concrete, is because you want it to crack in there and deep down where you just don't see it. You have a nice straight line versus an ugly, wandering crack. But yes, I mean, anytime you can make the sections smaller, the more joints you put in, the less potential, not necessarily for cracking, but that you would have undesirable cracking that shows up where where you would see it and you don't want it.
Great information. All right, we're going to take 2 more questions in the Q&A, and then we're going to move on because we have a lot more just great info for you. So one more question from Catherine. Is 12 inches the minimum or standard height of the subbase?
So typically we will do our subbases at 6 inches. So 6 inches of crushed 3/4 inch washed drain rock, and then 6 inches of pervious concrete. That's typically what we'll do. We might even, if the soil, and especially with a more clay soil, if we might even go a little less, if there's a sandier, better draining soil, we could go 5.5, 5.5. That's typically what we do, but you can go more for sure. I mean, if you really want to capture more water, if that's more of a consideration, certainly one could go to 12 inches or even more. There's really no limit to the thickness of the base rock, this drain rock that you could use. Yeah.
Okay. And our last question for this section, but keep the questions coming, please, is from Julian. What is repair cost versus regular cost for asphalt or concrete when tree roots push up on the materials?
Good question. That's going to depend probably mostly upon, really in this case, the availability of the contractor. As we'll talk about probably a little bit later too, the smaller the job, basically the harder it is to get a contractor out there, and just the more per square foot it's going to be. So I would say both in the case of porous asphalt and pervious concrete, it's going to take a specialized crew to do repair or do a section. It's not something anybody can do typically. So that's going to be probably your biggest factor as far as the cost go. Other than that, the materials themselves, the process is relatively straightforward and easy. And yeah, I mean, that's the one disadvantage of just being proactive initially about where the roots are, and also how the joints are placed as well. When you're putting in the material, can help minimize the damage from roots. And I would say too, that's one advantage asphalt would have as well. It's going to be something less likely to crack, and it has more flexibility than concrete will, as far as, kind of to some extent molding around a rising root.
All right, we have a couple more questions. We're going to save those for our next question and answer period, so Ryan can continue his presentation. But in the meantime, guys, please feel free to put in all your questions in that Q&A box, and we'll get to it at the end of Ryan's presentation. All right, Ryan, take it away.
Okay, on to permeable pavers, which generally are considered to be a normal interlocking paver that has a wider joint. So it's 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch wide, and that joint is filled with gravel. And so obviously when it rains, there's a high degree of permeability in that gap now, versus before where they're typically just butted up to each other. And they are also placed over layers of rock. Typically we add a couple different layers of rock. This bottom coarser layer can be made up of 1.5 inch rock, and then a 1/2 inch or 3/4 rock would go over that. And then you have a fine bedding course about 1/4 inch thick that the pavers themselves would be leveled off and set into. Now, when we install permeable pavers, we typically try to get a 1/2 inch crushed rock and just use that with the 1/4 inch bedding course to set the pavers in. and I don't remember, but you might better do a 3/4 and a 1/4. What you don't want to have is it was 1.5 inch rock on the bottom and then do the 1/4 inch rock on top, because of course it would just settle in. So you need to have some similarities between the sizes of the rock. Here's another example of permeable pavers. However, I will also mention that there is a paver that's actually permeable. Pacific Interlock makes a paver called HydroFlow. And this paver, it was at least 100 inches an hour permeability. It looks very similar to a normal paver and can be placed similarly with the rock that we talked about, the same way these pavers are set. And also we are in the process, I've actually moved a year ago next week to Oregon, and up here, I'm still going to the Bay Area to do installations. But up here, we're in the process of making our own pervious pavers or precast pervious concrete. We're trying to figure out how to do it more economically. We have grid pavers, which mostly consist of a honeycomb plastic structure filled with gravel or sod, other material. And these are typically highly permeable, especially if you use the gravel. And this is a cross section of a typical grid paver. In this case, it typically is set over, at least how we used to do it, would be set over base rock. And it's different than open graded crushed rock. Base rock is crushed rock, but it has the fines in it. Could be old crushed concrete as well, but it has the fines in it. So it doesn't have that reservoir, it doesn't have those voids to allow the water to be captured and soak in the water into the ground later, but it does have a high degree of permeability in and of itself. And the mitigating factor would be the soil, the undisturbed soil subgrade below. This compacted base rock is what's typically used under most pavements, including asphalt. And then you'll have a little bedding course of sand and with a plastic grid above that. And these are the old concrete grid structures, and you can put asphalt, or I'm sorry, you can put gravel as well as grass in there, and they can be irrigated as well. This one has some of the grid here. There are 2 lines. This was made specifically for a client of ours who had a vintage car they just brought in and out occasionally, so they wanted to have the grid for that. The rest of in this case, the rest of the yard is all this gold rock, this gravel. And the other thing that we have going on here is that the concrete is just ordinary. It's regular concrete, impermeable concrete, but there's slabs with 6-inch gaps in between. And these gaps are filled with gravel. And then below it is also set on crushed drain rock as well. So this is, again, a non-approved, but another kind of way to do a permeable pavement. As far as cost, on pervious pavers, they're typically the most expensive of the permeable pavements. That's a combination of the extra effort as far as put the gravel layers, to place the pavers, and the pavers themselves. The combination of those factors make the cost more expensive. Grid pavers are typically the least expensive. However, it goes up to the higher end when you're using the grass. So for the grass, you would need more preparation, both in the soil and putting the sod in, as well as you'll need an irrigation system. So that's the one thing as far as, it can be very attractive. It's green, that's great, but it can be more maintenance and more expensive to put in grid pavers with the grass. Permeability for pervious pavers is typically around 200 inches per hour, obviously highly variable. And again, because you have, an quote, larger area running off into a smaller area, you do need to make some accounting, some allowance for maintenance of that. The gravel in between, you can get weeds, it needs to be cleaned up and the gravel needs to be topped off periodically. On the grid pavers, if you're using gravel, there's really nothing more permeable than that, and it's easy to stay permeable, but it can be harder to keep clean, harder to keep the gravel in place. And they can be used, both of these can be used in most applications. The pervious pavers can be used, I've seen them on parking lots as well as some city streets. So I developed over about 12 years ago, we started, longer than that, we started developing PerkTop, which is a fine pervious concrete overlay to go over ordinary pervious concrete, typically applied about a 1/2 inch thick. It can have high SRI, which is solar reflective index, meaning it can be lighter in pavement color and therefore minimize urban heat island. And so it's also pervious concrete, but using very specific aggregate and admix. It's mixed in 60-pound sacks on site. We bring a ready mix truck to dump the pervious concrete out and mix the top and apply it over top. And here are some examples of all of our jobs that we've done over the years. We've done just about every application, as far as mostly it's been residential, mostly it's been driveways, but there's been some dog park in Santa Barbara, parking lots, commercial applications. And this is an up close version, a picture of it, so you can kind of see the texture, get an idea of that. And we use a saw cut to make our joints with it. And we can do literally any color. We had a client have her daughter draw this for us, and we put it into life. And again, a non-approved option, but we also, our other product is Perk Grout. And this is a grout that's designed to go specifically between the joints of flagstone set on sand or sand, compacted rock, or pervious concrete. And we sell it in a couple of locations, including in Linkso. This can be installed by just about anybody. And we also ship it and sell it all across the country and Canada too. And people are mostly purchasing Perk Grout because it is a great solution for what to do. It's clean, it's not messy. You don't get rocks moving around, you don't get weeds growing in it. It can be pressure washed. And so it's a good solution for that. But it's also, of course, permeable as well. This is a recap of all the costs and all the permeable pavers we had, and then the comparisons. And in the middle here, I have the ordinary concrete to kind of give you a sense of where that compares to the other permeable pavements. And again, these are, I think, accurate to today's. The costs are going up seemingly by the minute sometimes today. But I think these are accurate, pretty close to today. And they should be all inclusive, including the demo and excavation. A lot of the range and the cost often depends upon the size of the project. So for instance, at least in our case, I mean, if it's 500 square feet or less, it's going to be at least that much, on the higher end per square foot, and could be even more for that. For us, typically 1,500 square feet is a sweet spot as far as our costs on PerkTop, as far as the most efficient. But some of the other ones, it won't matter as much. It's permeable pavers are fairly straightforward to install, and on a smaller area, it probably wouldn't add as much per square foot. Okay. What questions do we have now? And
Wow.
What is it? So go ahead. Let's.
All right. Well, we have some green and sustainably conscious folks in the audience, which is just great to see. So we have a couple of questions pertaining to that subject. So the first one is pervious material any easier to recycle since concrete production produces so much CO2?
I'm sorry, say that first part again, Susie, is
Sure. Is pervious material easier to recycle than your standard concrete or asphalt?
okay. Yes, okay, I'll talk about that for a second. There's a couple things. It depends. I guess it just depends. I mean, as far as pavers in general are a very good option for reuse. I mean, that is one material in particular. Like if there's roots pushing up a paver driveway or something, you can, in theory, at least pull up those pavers, remove the root, lower the soil, and reset them. As well as you could take up a whole driveway of pavers and reuse them somewhere else. So in that sense, and they're usually made well and to be long lasting. And so in that sense, reuse is better than recycle. And so from that perspective, they can be a very good solution, for those reasons. Asphalt and concrete are both easily recycled and ubiquitously recycled. And there's lots of places to take them and have them redone. At least concrete, I assume asphalt the same. And so they can be recycled. I mean, they're broken up and reused as base rock. And also sometimes they're even separating the rock further to make, they make 3/4 recycled concrete aggregate as well, and smaller material too. So it can be relatively easy recycled, and there's a good infrastructure set up for that. As far as gravel, I find gravel to generally be more difficult to recycle because it usually gets contaminated and mixed with other debris, and then it's hard to separate and hard to make use of. But in some cases, it may be perfectly fine. And you could use it for other applications probably as well. The plastic, again, probably not so good. Though they probably make it from recycled plastic, But the one point I'll make as well, there is a lot of talk about how concrete in general does produce a lot of carbon dioxide in its production. And to clarify, it's like 1 ton of carbon dioxide is produced in the production of 1 ton of cement, which is the main binder in concrete. And it's known that concrete is the second most used material on Earth, second only to water. So therefore, it has a high impact on our carbon dioxide ratios. But what's also not mentioned is that half of the carbon dioxide that's produced in the production of concrete is a chemical reaction. Half of it is because you have to burn it almost 3,000 degrees, so a lot of energy goes into producing it. But half of it is also because there's a chemical reaction that happens and that releases carbon dioxide. What also happens later is that at least some of that, if not most of that, is recarbonated back into the concrete. So in the case of pervious concrete, it's going to recarbonate faster. There's more surface area for the air to reach. And so that area will actually sequester and pull in and have another chemical reaction where that carbon dioxide is now part of the concrete. Also, when you break up the concrete, there's been studies to show as well. So at the end of its life, it's broken up and crushed. It does sequester and absorb carbon dioxide as well, that way as well. So I think I answered that one.
Yes, you did. You actually answered the second question about greenhouse gases, pervious pavement compared to regular pavement in that last explanation. So great job, Ryan. Thank you so much. All right, our next question comes from Julian. I believe you were talking about geotextile materials previously, and he just wants to know and explain more about the geotextile material.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, because that is true. Typically, we'll put a geotextile fabric below the drain rock. So it almost acts like a French drain in that you'll have this fabric that goes over the soil to keep the soil separate and from infiltrating into the drain rock. So typically, we're using a 4-ounce non-woven, though just about any filter fabric is probably adequate. And this will go underneath the whole system over the existing subbase soil. And its primary application, its primary purpose is to mitigate that soil from infiltrating into the rock to maintain the life of the pavement, much as a French drain does. But it's also secondarily, it will add a little structural support to the system as well. Yeah, so it's beneficial.
Great. And our next question is from Joyce, and she asks, do companies that install pavers include demolition and disposing of old concrete that needs to come out before the pavers are put in?
You broke up right in the beginning, the companies.
Sure. She wants to know if the folks who come and put in permeable pavers, they're demolishing the old concrete. Do they normally take care of disposing that old material?
Yeah, yes. Well, probably, yes. They should anyways. I mean, we have, for us, we have our graders we work with, and they would come in and do the demo and handle it appropriately. We actually, all the soil is actually recycled. It's screened and then reused for pool fill often. In this case, the concrete is taken. There's a huge incentive to recycle concrete in that it's just really cheap, inexpensive to take it to the proper location to have it recycled, to have it crushed and broken down. It's just a lot less expensive to take concrete that way and have it dealt with than it is to just go and dump it. And if it's just a few pieces, maybe it's easier, but it's almost always going to be cheaper to deal with it appropriately. So yes, I would think most companies that do pervious paver installations would also handle the demolition and should do it appropriately.
Yes. And it's important to just always ask your contractor, your licensed contractor, before installing as well. And our next question from Bill is, he's asking about Hollywood driveways. And he explains what Hollywood driveways are: brick or concrete strips to support car tires with gravel center and edges. I'm assuming he's asking, are those pervious?
That's a good question, Bill. And in fact, I don't think I knew that name. But we have installed such driveways, and to some extent that we had the grid pavers with the 2 lanes that probably evoked that as well. I mean, so probably it's permeable. I mean, it's more permeable and it's better than just all pavement. But I guess a lot of it would depend upon, well, which way is the slope actually. It depends if it's still a heavy slope all going straight to the street on those 2 lanes. I mean, I guess it's not that permeable, but if there was less of a slope, or if it's sloping into the middle or the outside, then it could be somewhat permeable, certainly.
Okay. And our next question is going to test your knowledge, Ryan. Is there such a thing as permeable retaining walls?
Yeah, that is a good question too. There's some thought that could be a good way to go, because a major reason walls fail is from hydrostatic pressure, from water building up behind the wall and then eventually over time causing it to fail. So of course, if the wall itself was permeable, then in theory that solves that problem. I know pervious concrete has been at least tested for retaining walls, but specifically, I know that it is used as a backfill, like a reinforcing backfill. So typically on a retaining wall, you need the good drainage, but they'll actually call it a structural backfill, is what it's called in this case. And so instead of doing open drain rock behind the wall, you would put pervious concrete, and that will also be highly permeable, as well as add structure and rigidity to the retaining wall itself.
All right. Can't stump you today, right, Ryan? All right. And we have one about runoff. What is the best pervious type to collect house gutter runoff into the yard? And how far away from the house should a gutter runoff be located?
Also a good question. So we typically run our gutters 10 feet from the house. That's maybe a random number. I don't know if it means anything. And probably it would depend, it would depend on the exact circumstances you have. I mean, if it's depending on the slope and the surrounding grade and conditions, it might depend. But in general, 10 feet away is what we like to do. And what we've done, what we used to do anyways, was to do a dry well, called a dry well. And so we'd run a solid pipe underground from the downspout at least 10 feet. And then we'd empty it into a deep well, at least probably 4 feet and a foot, or depending on a foot and a half wide. And we'd fill it with concrete debris or gravel. And then we'd put on the top, we'd put an outlet. So once that well filled up, so the water was, the soil was waterlogged and not capable of absorbing anymore, then it would overflow into the surrounding landscape. And so we did that for years and years. And I'll say, pretty sure we did it before Palo Alto was recommending it even. I think they were against that at the time. It seemed like they were like, hey, just put it in this, for a long time ago, many decades ago. But now it definitely, it's more like this. And so that is a simple way we've done. That's what we've done. It works well. We used to recommend that you put something on top of your gutter to at least prevent debris and stuff from getting in there. I think that's still somewhat optional. This system seems to be pretty robust and little maintenance. So that's a simple way to go. You can also, a lot of people will use dry creeks. You can dump it into a dry creek. We've also done it. We can dump it under the permeable pavement. So in that layer of rock, you could just run it 10 feet and then have a 10-foot perforated pipe draining out into the pervious pavement, below, in this rock layer below. Those are some ways to deal with it.
Okay, great. We seem to have 3 more questions. And before I read those off, I do want to say for those still in the audience, thank you. And if you are a Palo Alto resident, please stay tuned. We have some great information about our rebates for you. So we're just going to run off through 3 more quick questions and then we'll get to that information. All right. Our next question is from Claire, and she is asking if you have any experience installing the Pacific interlock, or more specifically, plank pavers. If so, what are the pros and cons?
That I think you stumped me on that.
Claire, you win.
Plank paver, assuming you mean a long, the long could be 8 to 10 inches, 6 inches wide, type paver. Have not had experience actually installing those. It's more of a more recent design, and I think they look really nice. I don't think there's anything particularly special about them as far as you need to do uniquely installation wise. They might be slightly more prone to cracking just because they're longer and not as wide, but I think they're really good. I don't know.
Fair enough. All right, just 2 more ones. This one, Catherine seems to be having a little bit of a gopher problem, and she asks if gophers are able to dig their way through the subbase of pervious material. She's had gophers that dig their way through and under her driveway.
I'm curious to know what the existing driveway is, but we have not had, at least through Pervious Concrete, there's never been an issue that I'm aware of. They just wouldn't want to dig in that rock. And if they did dig below it, again, the Pervious Concrete being structural, it should not be impacted by a little void, 12 inches below. So I've not known that to be an issue. I know we did put in perk grout specifically because a customer had, I don't know if it was gophers or moles, digging through their existing flagstone and making a mess there. And it DG, decomposed granite in the joints of that flagstone. And so in that case, we took that out and put the perk route in. And to my knowledge, that solved the problem that the gophers were creating a mess, or the moles were probably in that case were creating a mess then. So in most situations, I would say that it's not a problem. I don't think that they go through even base rock. So in the case of a grid paver, the base rock, to my knowledge, I don't think that they would go through that or bother that. But it being less thick overall, it not being structural. I mean, a hole could possibly cave in later or something and cause unevenness, but it should be somewhat minimized.
Okay. And last but not least, do you have any photos of driveways you've done for mid-century homes, like in Eichler? I apologize for my pronunciation there. Eichler. And then specifically, do you recommend anything for modern homes, any pervious pavement solutions for modern homes such as this?
So I know we've done pavements on Eichlers. There was a project, we did one 7 or 8 years ago now, right on Middlefield in Palo Alto. That house was a Eichler, and we did do Pervious Concrete on that. You know, my biased opinion is that the Pervious Concrete can look good, especially the PerkTop with its fine texture, can look contemporary and lend itself to that type of architecture, Eichler or more modern contemporary design, because you can do more square. Typically, you'll do more of a square or angular, geometric straight lines. And you can also do a border or break it up with squares, alternating squares or something within it, design-wise. So typically that would be done more like that. As far as on our website with perviousproducts.com, we have a gallery and more pictures there. You're welcome to peruse through there and to see what else we may have. So usually, you'd want more of a solid surface, similar texture and color, and you'd want, these squares for design-wise to be more contemporary and lend itself also to the Eichler style.
Great. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. And at this point, I want to welcome Joanna and Shelby from the city of Palo Alto to discuss some of the fabulous rebates that the city is offering. Joanna?
Thanks, Susie.
Thanks, Susie. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Thanks again, Susie, and thank you, Ryan. That was a great presentation with lots of good information. I do want to mention that the city does not endorse any products from today's presentation. And with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into the rebates for our Palo Alto residents and businesses. So first off, I'm going to start off with our stormwater rebates, and then later I'm going to introduce Shelby from our utilities department, who will cover our landscape rebates. All right, so let's start off with our pervious pavement rebate. For pervious pavements, the city offers a rebate of $1.50 per square foot. And we do have maximum amounts for residential projects. For residential projects, you could receive a maximum amount of $1,000. And if you are a business owner that is attending today's meeting in Palo Alto, then you could receive a maximum amount of $5,000. For our pervious pavement rebates, we do have some requirements that you must follow as well. Your project must have a minimum area of 100 square feet. And your project must also be installed by a licensed contractor. I do want to mention that it's important to note that you must apply for your rebates prior to starting your projects or purchasing any materials. I do also want to note that artificial grass does not meet the city's stormwater quality goals, and at this time does not qualify for a rebate. All right, so we also offer 3 other rebates as well. These 3 other rebates are in partnership with Valley Water, so we cost share the rebate amounts that end up in your pockets. So first up on our list is our rain barrels. For rain barrels, you could receive a total of $70 per barrel with a size requirement of 40 to 199 gallons in each barrel. And for rain barrels, this is actually our only project that you can self-install, so long as you apply for the rebate first prior to purchasing any materials or starting your project. Next up on our list are cisterns. For cisterns, you could receive a total rebate amount of $1 per gallon. And we do have a size requirement for that as well. For cisterns, you must have at least 200 gallons or more. And this project must also be installed by a licensed contractor. I did mention all of the details for Pervious Pavements in our previous slide, but I do want to also highlight that our Pervious Pavement rebate is not in partnership with Valley Water, so the application process for this will be directly through the city. And all information for that is available on our website, which I will provide at the next slide. And last but not least, we do also offer a rebate for rain gardens as well. For rain gardens, you could receive a total rebate amount of $2 per square foot of roof area that's diverted, up to a maximum amount of $600. And for rain gardens, we do have a size requirement for that. You must have your project be a minimum of 100 square feet of roof area that's diverted. And at this time, rain gardens must also be installed by a licensed contractor. So previously, I mentioned that a couple of our rebates are in partnership with Valley Water. Again, those rebates are the rain barrels, the cisterns, and the rain gardens. So for those rebates, you can receive a higher amount since the Valley Water and Palo Alto is going to be cost sharing that. So for residential projects, you can receive a total lifetime rebate maximum of $3,000. And if you're a business in Palo Alto, commercial projects can receive a total amount of $55,000. So be sure to take advantage of that and apply for the rebates if you can. And as I mentioned earlier, all of this information is available on our website, which is cityofpaloalto.org/stormwater. For all of the rebates, please be sure to review all of the criteria and the terms and conditions carefully. We do list all the step processes step by step for each rebate, so it's easy to follow. For the rebates that are in partnership with Valley Water, you will be directed to the Valley Water website to complete your application. So once you're on there, please review their requirements as well. And again, I do want to highlight that you must apply for all of the rebates prior to starting any projects or purchasing any materials. Otherwise, the project may not be considered for a rebate. And again, this is all available on our website. And for our landscape rebates, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Shelby from our utilities department, who will cover what they offer.
Thank you, Joanna. Okay, I'll go ahead and cover our landscape rebates. Similarly to what Joanna mentioned about the stormwater rebates, we do offer these in partnership with Valley Water. So it is available to all Santa Clara County residents, although the price of the rebate would be different versus being a Palo Alto resident because of the cost sharing. Next slide, please. So this is a program that's offered through Valley Water, the WaterWise survey program. They offer indoor evaluations, which you do it yourself at home. They can send you a kit, and they also have videos online that guide you through doing the various tests to check for leaks, to check your flow rates, and other opportunities at home to improve water efficiency. They also have the outdoor water-wise survey, which is where you would schedule an appointment with Valley Water, and they would have one of their experts come out and do an evaluation of your landscape as well as your irrigation system. They'll make recommendations for replacements and upgrades that would help you conserve water in your outdoor use. Next slide, please. So we also offer a gray water laundry to landscape rebate program. This again is in partnership, so we cost share with Valley Water. This particular program is a little more specific in the sense that you have to have more eligibility in terms of the location of where your clothes washer is. It must be near an exterior wall. So it's very important to give them a call ahead of time to see if this is something that would be feasible for you to even install. They're super helpful if you give them a call over the phone, or even if they come out and meet with you in person. They're experts, and they'll walk you through all the steps that it would take to install a system like this. Next slide, please. And lastly, one of the most popular programs that we offer and cost share with Valley Water is the Landscape Rebate Program. This encompasses everything from landscape conversions as well as irrigation equipment upgrades. So for Santa Clara County residents, I believe it's $1 per square foot. And then for Palo Alto residents, it's $2 per square foot. And currently, the rebate caps for this is $2,000 for residential customers and $50,000 for commercial customers. However, I would like to note and inform everyone that the rebate amount is increasing by $1 starting this July. So if you apply now, you would still get the $2 per square foot. However, you have the option to hold off until July if you want to wait for the increased price. So keep a lookout for that on our website as well as Valley Water's website, and the prices will be updated soon. There's also inline drip irrigation conversions, and that is for 25 cents per square foot. And then they also includes the irrigation equipment upgrades. So this includes anything from high efficiency nozzles, rotor sprinklers, rain sensors, landscape meters, weather-based irrigation controllers. So each different device has a different rebate amount. So definitely check valleywater.org to see what price they would offer for the different devices available. Next slide, please. Oh, and that's it. So we'll go ahead and wrap up now. Thank you all for coming. I don't know if Ryan has any last words that he would like to share.
I do not, but thank you very much again for having me. Thanks for all your efforts to make this happen and for the rebate program and everything else. So thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this webinar, and just a note to everyone that the recording plus the slides will be sent out. Hope everyone has a lovely evening. Thank you so much, and thank you, Ryan. Oh, go ahead, Pam.
There is a question there that from Kevin. It says, what is landscape conversion?
Oh,
great question. Landscape conversion, that's any time that you convert a high water use landscape, such as a lawn or a pool, to drought tolerant landscaping. So anything that conserves water, yeah, and more native plants.
all right. One less question under the wire. Good job, Kevin. All right, and just checking the Q&A one more time. I think we've covered it all. So again, a big thank you to everyone, and our presenter, Ryan, and our panelists, Joanna, Shelby, and Pam, for joining us this evening. Have a lovely night. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.